Our title for today is Business Continuity, Risk Mitigation and Financial Planning. And I'd like to welcome all of us who have already logged in. And so I'd just like to welcome the President, Architect Mugure Jendu. We all know our President. She's an architect. And welcome, Mugure. She's the one who will be moderating the session for today. And we have a team of panelists who she will introduce to us. And as we begin, I would just like to remind us about the housekeeping rules so that we don't have interruptions as we go along with our presentations. We request that we switch off our microphones. If you have any question or any comment, you can use the chat button or the Q&A button, which is there. We can put our videos off, but if you are called upon, maybe if you have a question, you can be able to put your videos on and we can be able to see you. If you have any question, there's also a raise hand button. And if you have any questions, please let's type them in early enough. Let's not wait until the end so that some of our panelists can be able to prepare and also take up the questions. So that we don't waste much time, I'd like to call Mugure to proceed and introduce our panelists and tell us more about the topic that we are going to discuss today. And we hope by the end of the day, we'll be able to learn and know how we can be able to go through these hard times of COVID-19. Thank you very much and welcome, Mugure.
Okay, thank you very much, Olivia. I think all the panelists, attendees of this webinar, thank you firstly for joining us. As you know, AAK has been having a series of webinars focused on content that's relevant, particularly during this time. We're in an unprecedented crisis, and we felt as an association that we should hold weekly sessions that will help our members cope during this season. So this particular topic, business continuity, risk mitigation, and financial planning, I think is one of a lot of significance right now. So I think as Olivia has mentioned, as we proceed with the moderated session, I want to encourage participants to type in your questions either in the Q&A section or the chat section of the webinar. Please feel free, of course, to also engage on our social media platforms. We're using the hashtags #AAK webinar and #business resilience. Just as an opening, I'd like just to talk about a survey that we undertook as AAK among our members, particularly on the effect of COVID-19 on their businesses. This survey is actually still ongoing, so I encourage any members who have not submitted their responses to go ahead and submit their responses. As shown on your screen, just one or two things I want to highlight about this survey. The first slide there indicates how has your project progress been affected. Basically, we asked this question to members in terms of, and there are 148 responses we have gotten so far. And the green that's indicated there shows ongoing projects have slowed down. Ongoing projects stalled is in blue, and ongoing projects have remained on course is in yellow. As you can see, there certainly is a dramatic change in how we are able to do business. We'll move on to the next slide. Okay, thank you very much for that. This next slide focuses on how members expect their revenues to be affected. And I think it's a really important slide because it does show what members are anticipating in the next few months in terms of how their revenue will be affected. And we asked them, do you think your revenue will be affected more than 10%, more than 25%, more than 50%, more than 75%? As you can see, there are 40% estimate that the crisis will have a 50% decrease in their revenue, and 30% of members expect the impact to be close to be 75% of revenues. So if you're a business, if you're a consultant practicing individually, you know, it's a crisis that is unplanned and it's going to have a drastic change in your revenues and operations for most of us. So today we want to have the discussion on how to plan ahead for such similar issues. In the same survey, let's go to the last page of that PowerPoint. We also asked members, we can go to the last page of that PowerPoint. Okay, Apologies, just give us 1 minute. Let's move to the last page of the PowerPoint, Christine. Okay. Perhaps I'll just share it. Okay, thank you very much for that, Christine. With regards to whether or not we asked members if they have existing business continuity plans, the responses we got from our members was that 47% of respondents do not have a business continuity plan in place. 33% are in the process of actually developing one, and only 20% of respondents have a plan in place. So I'm happy today to moderate this session. We have a great group of people with expertise to speak on this, and I'd like to introduce them. As I introduce you, just kindly put on your camera so that we can see you. In no particular order, let me introduce our panelists. Mumo Musuva. Mumo is the Managing Director of Planning System Services Limited, and is the Director of Planning Project Management Limited. He's also a trustee of the Community Kuka Foundation. Karibu sana Mumo, say hello.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on this webinar.
Karibu Mumo. I'll introduce the next panelist, Danielle. Danielle Anderson. She's the founder of Step and Stone, a coaching and strategy consultancy for early and growth stage entrepreneurs. Step and Stone was founded in London in 2013 and opened a second office in Nairobi in 2017. She holds a bachelor's degree in management and organizational behavior from New York University, Stern School of Business. And prior to starting her business, she spent a decade working within investment banking in New York, Chicago, and London. During her time with Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and HSBC, she developed business strategies, managed projects, and created new business opportunities in emerging markets. She loves travel, 90s hip hop, Thai boxing, and nail art. Karibu, Danielle, say hi to people. Sorry, Danielle, we can't hear you. Sorry, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Welcome, Danielle. Cecilia Wahinya. Cecilia is an architect and director of projects and business development at Triad Architects, and she's a trustee of the Triad Foundation. She's passionate about proactive planning and structuring of business systems. She's a wife and mother to 2 active boys. Her immediate personal disruption has been juggling, doing her job, and being a teacher in charge of all digital learning setups, and of course, study discipline. She knows she's running breathless on the teacher part. Karibu sana, Cecilia.
Thank you, Mugure.
Right. Jaspal Singh is an architect with a passion for creativity and attention to detail, and he's also the founder of Sketch Studio, an architectural and interior design practice that is committed to close client consultants and stringent management procedures that allow for creative projects to be completed within budget, time, and according to program. Jaspal is frequently thought to be a slave driver, but believes he has an immense passion for disliking mediocrity in every aspect of life. He strives for perfection in all of his endeavors. He's an active participant in Rhino Charge and drives car number 39, and is also the team leader and somehow finds time for it despite being a serious workaholic. Welcome, Jaspal, and thank you for making the time.
Thanks, Mugure.
Okay, Nuru Mugambi is the Public Affairs Director and Sustainable Finance Lead at Kenya Bankers Association. She's a steering committee member of the Sustainable Urban Economic Development Program, the chair of the Eisenhower Fellowship Program in Kenya, and a founding trustee of New Faces, New Voices, part of the Graham Markell Trust. She has been at the forefront of advocating for SME funding, particularly the Inuka SME program. She also designed the Kenya Green Bond Program, which facilitated the first corporate green bond in East and Central Africa. Very welcome, Nuru.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
All right, great. So we will go right into the moderated session. And again, we encourage participants to type questions even as we continue in this session. So Cecilia, I'd like to start with you. Triad has a business continuity plan, which we understand you guided and it's now active and working. So as an opening to this conversation, maybe explain to us what is business continuity.
Thanks, Mugure. I think I'm very happy that you've actually started this discussion with that survey because it sort of gives us a nice starting point in terms of understanding how well prepared we are as an industry. in terms of a definition of business continuity, it is organization's capacity to operate in the face of a severe disruption, and then recovering from that, or the effects of that, back to profitability, or to even better performance post the disruption. Now, this can only be achieved through very detailed prior planning. And this is best placed when you do use the risk-based level of thinking to be able to project in as far as possible the causes of disruption to a business. Yeah. So once you've identified those causes of a disruption, then move that to identifying the effects of such disruption to the business, so that you're able to gauge at what level or what is the severity of that disruption to your business and what you need to do to then be able to deal with it, or to put up mitigation measures and ways of recovery should then that affect your profitability. Now, the last part is in putting up operational frameworks to which then this is action plans for this continuity is effected. Now, I'd like to broadly categorize continuity into three categories. The first one is continuity at the leadership level. Yeah, and this is where you do detailed planning in the form of succession planning, strategic planning, and then setting up frameworks for operations. And that is working every workflow and then setting a structure for operating or effecting those workflows. Now, the second level is the operational level. Now, the operational level is where you look at in detail all the work units within your business, right? So in case of consultants, we do projects. Yeah. So what are your project implementation plans, and how well have you looked at the risks that are inherent for every project or classes of projects that you work on? So that is one on that. Then another example in that is your data and IT systems management. Yeah. As consultants, you know, we don't produce products. Our products come in form of technical data. Yeah. So how well do you mitigate the loss of that data? Because whatever the cost of that, which is what you would mitigate, so you don't get to a point of losing the data. But then there's also recovery in case you actually do lose that data. How do you recover from that? And those are kind of the items that we look at the operational level. Then, of course, is a big one, which is kind of what we're going through right now, which is continuity in case of an emergency. Now, an emergency has an effect of turning all of us into generals in the heat of a battle, where we are all battling to try and deal with immediate effects or immediate ways to operate. You're troubleshooting on the go, yeah? And you have to get people working differently. So you're caught up in that heat of the battle, but continuity in this case then lies in the capacity to cast clever eyes into the near future or to the far future. You know, when you're in a battle, the enemy does not tell you or give you a timeline that I'll stop shooting at you on the 7th of May at 4 o'clock. Yeah, so it is capacity that even when you're caught up in that battle, that you can still plan and look at what are those measures I can put in place to be able to recover at the end of this battle, because it's having an effect on my business, to be able to recover out of it and return to profitability fast enough so that the business can then get back to operation, or to even better, to performing better than it was performing before. And that can be a combination of various aspects, and it's always a difficult balance because you have to go both on offensive and defensive. Now, defensive is starting to look at what are the operational efficiencies you can employ in that business so that you tighten up your costs to be able to survive longer as you battle. And then, of course, the offensive is looking at what are the opportunities that underlie in that battle or in that situation of disruption that you can then start to take up to improve or to get ready to launch again in terms of getting back into profitability. That will be of benefit to you and give you a competitive advantage in a competitive market. So I think that sort of broadly defines what continuity is to most businesses.
Thank you so much for that, Cecilia. I really like your analogy of generals in battle. I think a lot of us are feeling that way right now. I just want to maybe just take you back to the beginning Why did you feel it was important? Because you didn't anticipate this crisis would be there. Why did you as a business feel it was important to have a business continuity plan in place? What drove that?
Now, Triad Architects has been in operation for 57 years. Now, it has been that long because it maintains and effectively implements a succession plan and a strategic plan that is updated every 5 years. Yeah, so working on continuity or bringing in the dimension of continuity has just been building up on good management principles and good leadership, going back all the way 57 years ago, and building that to develop it further to be able now to define business continuity for Triad. Now, how did this come in? As I said, we've had a very structured management systems, and these have been certified to the ISO 9001 standard. And this has been, we've had this certification since the year 2000. So it is at the point where we were doing the recertification to the current 2015 standard that we started to move to a more proactive look at analyzing risk. Now, in this standard, the issue of risk analysis and risk-based thinking comes out very strong. And it's actually one of the key management principles that's advocated in that standard. So when we started to look at this, in trying to restructure Triad to the new standard, that's when we started now looking at risk-based thinking and looking at all our workflows coming from the leadership level, the succession planning, the strategic planning, and playing that strategy into our workflows, and then playing in the risk-based thinking to be able to look at what are those roadblocks that are likely to come in every aspect of our workflows that would then affect the business. Yeah. Now, as you do that, there are two things that you do when you're looking at risks to a business. One, you need to mitigate the risk. And what do you actually mitigate? You mitigate the causes of the disruption. And I'll give you an example. In data management, as I said, our product comes in technical data. So in data management, what would be the effects or the risks to data? It could be things like fire, something will burn down your server. It could be a failure of equipment because equipment do fail. It would be theft, that someone broke into your office and went with the whole box of a server. So those are causes. So what do you do to those causes? You mitigate. Yeah, so you set up access controls and protocols to accessing the server room. You do firefighting installations. You maintain and service server equipment. You do all that mitigation because you have already foreseen the potential causes of such a disruption. So what is continuity in that scenario? It is mitigating the effect of data loss. Yeah, it is looking at, yes, I've done all this mitigation to the causes, but then should that event happen and we actually lose data or that server fails and then presenting the loss of data, how can we prepare beforehand so that if such an occurrence actually happens, we don't suffer the effects of such a disruption? And that's when our continuity comes in. And you start now looking at the other side beyond mitigating the causes, you look at mitigating the effects. Yeah, and that's where now where continuity aspects would come in, backup systems and backup of backup. And then as you look at that, it transfers you to other risks like cybersecurity, and then you have to deal with that as you do that. So you have to follow the whole chain of your workflow, and every time you solve it, it presents a different level of a situation that you have to deal with, and then you deal with it, and then you have the outcome of that is that you have a business continuity plan.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. I want to move over to Danielle. Danielle, Cecilia has mentioned leadership as a core planning line for business continuity. You have a background with entrepreneurs and startups. From your experience of dealing with different business owners, founders, what are the most common attributes you find among people who are successful or able to handle, disruption well?
Okay, great question. So I think that there's 4 areas where entrepreneurs and business owners really thrive. The first is that they're able to take risks, and this is something that Cecilia has already touched on. Risk-taking is an important part of any business owner's journey. The second is that they're resourceful. So they're able to tap into the resources that they have at their disposal. They're able to come up with new resources that aren't yet at their disposal and really understand the power of a network and leveraging relationships in a lot of ways. I think the third is that they have a healthy dose of reality. So they're not too caught up in their own ideas or their own way of executing ideas, but instead they're open to different possibilities. So they listen to what their customers are asking for, what their clients are looking for, and are willing to adapt to fit the needs of their customers. In addition, they're realistic about their finances. So they have an eye on their numbers. They're conscious about what those look like. They know what sort of decisions need to be made around them. And like I said, it's a healthy dose of reality on all those different elements. And I think the fourth area is resilience, which is what we're really talking about today. You know, even in times when it's not COVID-19, entrepreneurs need to be resilient because we're faced with uncertainty every single day. We make decisions without having all the information. We have, you know, strategies that we try to put in place, but as Cecilia said, sometimes there are changes that happen without us thinking about it. So resilience is a key component of success because we need to be able to adapt and to get through tough times, whether they're global or local or just company based.
Thanks, Danielle. And I just want to maybe continue on that train of thought because I think we've talked a little bit about maybe more startup founders. I'm wondering about people who have been in business for a while and maybe traditionally are set in their ways. Yeah. What would you recommend in terms of being able to innovate in terms of a crisis and how better leaders can prepare and respond to upcoming challenges? And can these skills actually be taught, and if so, how?
Okay, so I think there's 2 pieces there. For the first, in terms of what can current business owners do or business owners that have been going for a long time, I think that those 4 attributes that I just mentioned are still completely relevant. So when we think about risk-taking, this is now an opportunity for existing business owners to do something new, to try something different, to be open-minded that they might not have the best solution any longer. So making a different decision and going in a different direction is a risk, right? The second one around resourcefulness, it's about understanding what can your business do given the resources that you currently have. So perhaps you can shift your focus a little bit and be innovative in the way that you deliver your products and services to your customers. Maybe you can create something completely different with your expertise and with the people that you have around you to to deliver now when people aren't maybe looking to spend on your traditional products and services. So it's still being resourceful in understanding how you can use all of these different pieces to get to where you're trying to get to. The third about reality, you know, it's still an important attribute for existing owners as well as new owners because you need to have a grasp about what's going on in your business. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, finance is one of the most important pieces. And I know we're going to talk more about that on this panel, so I won't dwell on it now. But, you know, looking into your numbers, being aware of what your runway looks like, how long do you have until cash runs out, you know, what money is outstanding that's due to you, what money do you have to pay that's, you know, that might deflate your bank balance even more. Being a business owner, you have to have a grasp on that on that for the entire duration of your business existence, right? And then finally, you know, in terms of resilience, it's about just keep going. You have to be able to experiment, to try different things, to fail at those different things, to be open to the input from others around you, to give you different ideas. And I think that leads on to the second part of your question is like, can these things be learned? And I think in many ways, yes, they can. Anything can be learned if we put ourselves into a position where we're able to practice it. So, you know, if you think about when you're a child and you start walking and you fall over all the time, that's the same expectation you have to have on a continuous basis whenever you're trying something different. You have to be prepared for that failure and to take those learnings from failure and then to make adaptations and to do that different. So I think, yes, we can learn these skills, but the way that we learn them is through practice.
Right. Thanks so much, Danielle. I think you've given us a lot to think about, and I think we'll come back to the topic of runway. But I want to move over to Jaspal. Jaspal, one of the things that Cecilia highlighted is about operations, how important they're in your business continuity plan. From your own experience running an architectural firm, how important are systems and processes to business continuity and resilience?
Okay, thanks for that. Now, it's obviously very important for a business to have processes and systems in place, because we are basically a client service industry. So it's very critical that we are able to keep in touch with our clients on a day-to-day basis. It is important for us to understand that our normal work process has been affected. The way you would have normally operated on a normal day was come to the office, deal with situations, go to a site, deal with council issues, come back to the office, get some work done and go home. Now, the whole system has been affected, and we have to deal with an abnormal situation, which in net effect eventually could become the new normal. So some of the things that we've got to look at, one is we've got to maintain all the touch points. You need to keep in touch with all your clients on a regular basis. You need to keep in touch with fellow consultants to make sure that your projects keep running. It's very important for me to emphasize the need for people to be able to work. You might not be able to go to your office and actually work from there, but it is extremely important for everyone to understand that you need to carry on working, because we're in a situation where we do not know when things are going to end, when the pandemic is going to end, and if it will ever end. It's all speculative at the moment. So we have to adapt and come up with ways in which we can achieve what we have been always doing in a different manner, which is kind of, very closely integrated to our day-to-day practice. It is, what does that entail? One, we must make sure safety and whatever the government is emphasizing on in terms of safety, social distancing, wash your hands, stay at home if you can, avoid, going out, the curfew times. We need to respect that as a key thing. The other thing that comes into place is you need to have a situation where you ensure everyone in your setup is able to work. You need to be able to facilitate the tools and equipment to enable them work remotely, because that is, a lot of your staff, if they're using public means to come to the office, it might be something that you really need to look at to, and facilitate it. You might need to look at a process where you have back office support, maybe on a rotational basis, so that you're still able to keep the system running. You'll need to make sure your infrastructure is sorted out, so that you bridge the gap between yourself and your sites and your staff and your consultants, and of course, wherever you're operating from. For those who had not put maybe any infrastructure in place and were waiting, it is a key thing that you need to invest in. As Cecilia pointed out, in terms of data management, getting your systems in order so people can access remotely, ensuring there's internet connectivity. Maybe you guys don't have access to the internet, you facilitate it just to bridge the gap and make it easier for people to work remotely. If your people are actually coming to the office, it's extremely important you maintain your social distancing, provide sanitization facilities so they can sanitize, follow the government guidelines on whatever has been told to us. Make sure you have running water and soap for people to keep clean. You could be in a situation where you have stopped client meetings, physical client meetings, but that doesn't mean you do not look for an alternative way. So you could achieve the same effect by using Zoom, MS Teams, or FaceTime, or WhatsApp video calling. It's very important for people to keep safe, right? I can't keep emphasizing on that point. And sometimes you have to take harsh decisions. If you feel a client's premises are not safe, to be able to tell them that you'd like to meet in a safer environment or use an alternative method. So there are some key decisions, people will have to make. Now, when it comes to processes, it also means documentation. How do you issue your drawings? How do you follow up to make sure your drawings reach where they're supposed to? It means documenting any variations and changes, because if your projects are ongoing, your contract documentation still needs to remain intact. You cannot let the gaps come in. You need to be able to keep all your records in terms of instructions that you're giving, in terms of any variations and cost implications. You must track and respond to all correspondence from consultants and clients, so that you try to keep the system going. It should not be a situation where we think we can put brakes, wait for things to come back to normal, because we don't know if they'll ever be a normal again, and come back to wherever we think we could have picked up from. We need to sort of change the mindset and carry on with as if things might never get back to normal. So you create a new normal, in short. And then of course some of the other aspects you need to check is your cash flows. You've got work in progress, you've got your debt collection, you've got recoveries. Of course, you might find yourself in a situation where you will have to be sensitive to clients, because they are also in the same situation as yourself. But you could work out how you could structure the payments and still keep the ball rolling, because at the end of the day, you have staff who are coming to work. You would like to, as much as possible, keep them on board and still have your business running.
Yeah.
In European countries, the research has shown that generally productivity has increased because people are able to put in a full 8 hours of billable time because of the commute. Generally, sometimes they spend 2 to 3 hours. So those are some of the things that people need to look at and see how you can streamline as a process to make sure you carry on with your day-to-day running of your practices.
Thank you. I think, Jaspal, that you've given us a lot of meat for us to really, a lot of wealth of information for us to process. And I'm cognizant of the fact that Danielle will be leaving us at 4 o'clock. So I want to ask Danielle one more question. I also want to encourage any participants who may have questions for her to put them in the chat, and Danielle will follow up to try get those answers and make sure they get to the participants of this webinar. But I just going back to the charts that I showed in the beginning, where most businesses expect their revenues to be affected 50 to 75%. People are making hard decisions that affect their employees. What recommendations would you make to managers, business owners who are dealing with this? Because we're dealing with people.
I think you've hit the nail on the head right there by saying simply that you're dealing with people. You need to have empathy. You have to understand that everyone is in a very difficult situation. And I think the key for managers now is to really step up your communication. So in this time, especially if you're working remotely and you don't get to see each other face to face, you can lose a lot in body language if you're just relying on text messages or Slack messages or phone calls. So I think over communication at this point in time is better than less communication, and just giving your employees as much information as you are willing to share with them. And in my opinion, I think you should be as transparent as possible. So if you know that your business is going to run out of money in 2 months' time, there's no use pretending that that's not the case. It's better for you to have a conversation with your employees and to say to them, this is the situation and these are the options that we can explore. Maybe one of the options is reducing salary so that you can employ them for longer, and hopefully that gets us to the other side of a new normal, as we're saying. Maybe it doesn't, but at least if you are able to say, okay, this is what the situation looks like, and try to keep them as prepared as possible, because that way they can plan on their side too. it's better for them to know that in 2 months' time, they won't be getting a check any longer than for it to come as a surprise to them, even though you might know that information now. So be transparent, over communicate, and remember that you're speaking to another human being that also has, you know, people depending on him or her and a life to support. So just try to be compassionate.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Danielle. Momo, I just want to bring you in following on Jaspal's response on systems and processes, and also on the operations side in terms of planning for business continuity. From your experience and from how you practice, what do you think is most important in planning for continuity for built environment professionals, you know, across the board? Is it IT, project management, the human resource element? What element do you think is most important, Momo?
Well, thanks very much. I mean, when you think about, when you look at business continuity and, you know, what Cecilia and Jaspal were talking about, you know, there's essentially three elements to this equation. The first being the business processes, the second being the human resource, and then the third being your business partners, be it clients, consultants, contractors, you know, the people that are part of your ecosystem. I think by far the most important one to think about in this type of situation is your human resource, because, you know, our businesses are the people that we are, and I think, you know, it's the most important and unfortunately by far the most challenging for many reasons that have been pointed out through this conversation. Now, how does one go about doing that? I think Danielle's suggestion on engagement is crucial. I certainly have learned a lot about that, you know, if you're able to engage with your team, your colleagues in the office, that's very important, because you need to carry everyone with you, and you need everyone to carry the business with you, because without your team, then you have no business. Then, you know, as you think through that, then, you know, being flexible and adaptable as to how you utilize that human resource as part of your business continuity plan. You know, the whole thinking about compartmentalization of roles and responsibilities in the office. I think that is something that in situations where you have to look to business continuity, people have to be adaptable to different roles and responsibilities. And Cecilia touched on that a bit earlier, as well as Jaspal. You know, those for me are by far the most important elements in terms of professional service. And we've certainly learned through the last few weeks and also the last 2-3 years where we've been dealing with the economic challenges, that that's an area to focus on.
Thank you so much, Momo. So Nuru, you've been quiet, so I want to bring you into the conversation. So even before this COVID-19 pandemic, we had already seen quite a downturn in the construction industry, and this was quite evident when we do a semi-annual status of the built environment report, and a report for December 2019 showed a decrease in projects that were coming out. So here we are with an unprecedented situation. Things were already kind of murky. Our members were struggling. What short-term strategies from your background would you recommend to help small businesses to navigate this period?
Yeah, I think the rest of the panelists really have covered a lot of the things I would touch on, and indeed, I think we all recognize that this is a dynamic space that we're finding ourselves in. So I think first and foremost, we must have a sense of mental resilience, and I think resilience seems to be the key word of this conversation. But I think probably what I would add is this idea of really having a good handle on what your comparative advantage is. And I like reading research papers, and there's a very interesting paper that was published by Duke University that talked about cats and dogs. And I don't know who on this line is a dog person, who's a cat person, but in this study, they were trying to understand which is a better hunter. Are dogs better hunters or cats better hunters? And they found that dogs, they use and leverage on their strength and speed, whereas cats, they're very strategic and they're very stealth-like. And when you look at efficiency, from an energy efficiency and time, they found that, okay, dogs are probably faster at hunting, but cats are more strategic. So who is a better hunter? And what that brought out is this idea of comparative advantage, okay? So some of us might be quick to implement, might be quick to respond to this environment. Others might be a little bit more purposeful, a little bit more strategic. But at the end of the day, it really just depends on the individual institution. So I think it's important for us as business owners to really understand and dig deep, to really think about what is my business's comparative advantage, and how should I best respond to this environment. I don't think there is one answer. I think everybody's grappling with this change. I was on a webinar last week with some SMEs, and we're talking to farmers and consultants and IT people, and everybody's trying to adjust. And I shared with them that they shouldn't feel too badly about it and not knowing what the answer is, because everybody doesn't have answers. Even bank CEOs don't have the answers. Everybody's trying to figure this thing out. So I think probably this issue of comparative advantage is an important one that I haven't heard. The other one I would add is engaging the community. I think as experts in the built environment, you all have the comparative advantage of design and really understanding design and systems. And everything moving forward will be about good design and efficient systems. So I think there is a role that you can play in terms of engaging your ward, your constituents, even the neighborhoods where you live, and supporting them from a consulting basis. It could be pro bono to start, but once things start emerging from this COVID cloud, I think your talent and your expertise will be valuable, as long as you just keep engaging and stay connected. And then the final thing I'd probably add is this idea of planning for the next crisis. I'm sure we all have seen the climate change studies that have been coming out about how climate change is going to exacerbate literally every risk and every crisis issue we have in this continent, from health to education to youth unemployment. And I think probably people have not really appreciated this impact of climate change, and perhaps COVID is now helping us see how quickly we can get disrupted. So if we were disrupted within 30 days at this level by one health crisis, can you imagine if we have a health crisis and flooding right across the country, not just in certain parts of the country? So I think we need to understand that this so-called new normal includes being resilient to crisis, because we're going to keep having these crisis situations. Yeah. I don't know if you want me to touch on the banking perspective also, but I don't know. But I think that kind of covers the point.
I think we will come to the banking perspective, because I think there's a number of our members will want to hear from you on that. And maybe just from where you have stopped in terms of the next crisis and climate change. It's also worth to note that today is Earth Day. So for those who didn't know, today is Earth Day, even as we have this conversation. But I'll continue on the conversation, and maybe I'll just go back to you, Cecilia. In terms of continuity, and Nuru stopped that you have to think of the next crisis. And we need to look at risks that may occur in a business. For many of us and in the audience who have never done a risk assessment plan, can you give us a few elements that we need to look at in terms of assessing the risks our business can go through?
Right, Mugure. Yeah, so I think a lot of the items or the areas of a business that need to be looked at have actually already been covered. But in terms of looking at the factors that you should actually consider, is one, you should be able to classify disruptions. Yeah, so once you have looked at all the potential disruptions that are likely to occur in a business, you need to classify them. And how do you classify them? You classify them by the effects that they're going to have. And the effect can come in three different areas. One, it can be an effect on people. Yeah, the current crisis has an effect on people directly. It's a risk to our lives. So that needs immediate action and needs to be handled with the same level of understanding and severity that it presents. Then, of course, is the effect on the premises or activity workflows. And I say premises because most of our activities are domiciled in offices or in work areas. So when you disrupt the premises, you effectively start to disrupt some of the work activities that actually do happen within that premises. And this crisis also has that effect. The fact that we do have a working premises, but we can't all show up in that premises at the same time. Yeah, so there's a level of disruption that this is presenting. And of course, that level of disruption or that level of classification is a hit on profits. Yeah, which again is also happening in this case. And I think this is why the level of severity for this crisis is right at the top there, because it hits all those three levels of classification of those risks. Then the second factor you should be looking at is look at the likelihood of that disruption occurring. Yeah. So I was speaking to you earlier and I was telling you that I don't think anyone had anywhere written that when coronavirus happens, this is what we'll do, because it was not foreseeable. We had foreseen all the other issues. We are losing data. We've been hit by terrorism twice to a good level of severity. So that had come to fore to most of us to know that, yes, our offices, wherever you're located, whatever building you're at, you can actually be disrupted because of terrorism, because it has happened in Kenya several times. So the likelihood is something that you can look at, because then you can classify your risks on that level. Then there's the issue of severity. Now, there's some risks which are there, yes, and can be noted as risks, but how severe are they to a business? There's some of them that you may actually accept that this risk will happen, but because we have analyzed our capacity to handle a lot of these things, may not be something worth spending too much time on, because it will not shake you. And again, this is very specific to a business. Yeah. So assessing of risk is not a one-suit-fits-all kind of a scenario. So every business is positioned differently, and so you have to assess it for what that business is. So severity, again, if I use the case that we are in right now, the reason it's most severe is because, remember the first classification I've given you of the people, premises, and profit, it hits all those three at the same time. Yeah, so you can't say you're going to deal with any of those. There's a risk to all those three aspects at the same time. And I think that's why it's the most severe kind of a disaster we're going through right now. Then beyond that, it's not good to just look at the gloom. So the next item you should look at that, yeah, disruptions will always happen, but what are those inherent opportunities that come with it? Yeah. So every disruption, and I know one of them, like technology, we call it the digital disruption, but is it really a disruption or is it an enabler? So it depends on the lens you're wearing when you're going through a disruption to be able to see everything with a bigger and broader perspective. And only then, if you do that, will you be able to see that a lot of these situations bring opportunities and a different way of thinking in businesses to be able to position yourself better for the future. So I think if you look at it broadly, to be able to classify, look at the likelihood, the severity, and then dig out for opportunities, will actually give you a pretty good basis in trying to analyze the risks within an organization.
Thank you so much for that, Cecilia. Momo, I want to come over to you, and I have two somewhat interesting questions to ask you. One is that, you know, always the emphasis in terms of continuity is preparedness. But then once there's a disaster, what are your thoughts on making lemons out of lemonade, and perhaps from your own lessons of your own in terms of resilience? What can you tell us about resilience? So that would be the first one. What are your thoughts on making the best of a poor situation? And then secondly, are there insurmountable risks in professional practice, like those ones you cannot get past? And if so, what do you feel that they are?
Wow. Well, I think to answer your question, I probably would like to just turn the direction of this conversation slightly towards you know, what we are likely to face, or what we are in the process of getting into in the next coming months and coming years. And that is due to this current situation with the coronavirus, we're inevitably getting into an economic recession, and it sounds like inevitably an economic depression. Now, to begin to answer your question, I think history is always a good place to start, and it's always good to look back when we've had periods of economic recession and economic depression, and how the profession and practice of architecture has evolved through those different periods. I mean, if you look back to the Americas and the Commonwealth, we've had periods of depression and economic recession and depression from 1893, the 1930s, the 1990s, and the 2008. And what has been consistent through all these periods is that the profession of architecture and the construction industry is always hit hard through these recessions, and recovery is going to take years. It's not going to change overnight. It probably will take years. The Great Depression of the 30s took about 20 years for recovery, and some of them have taken average of 3, 4, 5 years. It's going to be very interesting to see how this confluences with our own unique economic calendar here, which is the election. We're coming to 2022, and we've always witnessed a slowdown in economic activity coming up to the election. So it'll be very interesting to see how the politics and the politicians behave through this period. So looking back to history, what's happened? Depressions have also been associated with changes in the profession, in terms of how people work, in terms of styles of architecture, believe it or not, in many cases, to simplify the construction design and approach because of cost. We've also seen a lot of changes in businesses. Unfortunately, a lot of big businesses which do not have flexibility in their systems or adaptability in their systems, if they survive through these economic depressions, many of them struggle to regain their momentums. And with that, some of them fade away, and and you get new businesses, and there's a lot of historical lessons through that. So there's this change to design, there's radical change to the business climate, and I think that's really where we should be applying our minds to, is how do we find the opportunity through adaptability in design? How do we find opportunity in this radically altered business climate? And so going back to business strategies and recoveries, I think the opportunities are there to relook at our business models. We have to accept that our business models have to change. We have to accept that our products have to adopt with affordability. If we don't do that, then we stand the risk of failure. We have to be creative. This is the time to be creative because we have to find ways of augmenting our income. And I think as a profession, we need to start thinking very carefully as to how we can apply our minds collectively towards the built environment, and how we can adopt towards augmenting our income. In America, for example, a lot of the mergers between architectural and engineering firms to form architectural engineering firms happened during the Depression. So you had a lot of consolidation of business models. So your professional practice was not singled out as a one type profession, but you could actually provide multidisciplinary services. I mean, that is one possibility that I think we should be exploring. we have to think about the role of government in recessions and depressions. All the economies that have pulled through periods of economic recession have had a strong government impetus in terms of investment, employment creation, incentivization, reliefs for supporting costs. And we have to all think about how we engage with government as an industry and as a profession to get support and to get investment through public sector projects to keep the profession going. And then of course, there's the new frontiers. And I like what Nuru said. You know, you've got sustainability, the green agenda, climate change. And I think that is one area that we need to embrace very quickly as professions. One of the things that I'm obviously very keen that we all apply our minds to is how we can motivate different sectors to support each other. And, you know, Nuru's presentation, I think for me, is one of the more important ones in terms of stimulating a debate between the architectural profession, the build profession, and banks or financial institutions, and how we can work around through all these different opportunities and possibilities in order to find ways of surviving through these periods. But I can tell you one thing for sure, this is going to be a long one. I don't want to sound like a prophet of doom. It's going to take years. Already we've had 3 bad years of economic depression, regression, and this whole situation is just turning things upside down. So we have to adopt, we have to accept that our business climate has changed, and the way we deliver architecture or buildings has to change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Momo. I think I'll just ask one more question to Nuru, and then we shall move over to the Q&A. I can see a lot of vibrant questions coming in. So Nuru, I think Momo really laid the ground for your question, which is what are financial institutions doing in response to this current crisis? And maybe in a more broader perspective, you can also talk about opportunities available to SMEs if they're there. Yeah, so we'd like to just hear about what financial institutions are doing from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I think this is a difficult time for everyone, but we have seen some policy pronouncements coming through, which were arrived at through work between Central Bank and the Kenya Bankers Association. And one of the key policy changes that has been done is the lowering of the cash reserve ratio. And this is an important one because this helps open up some liquidity that was not already there in the market. And it'll especially assist, I think, the tier 2 and tier 3 banks. So that's good because the tier 2, tier 3 banks are the ones who historically have really been engaging and working with the SME client. And then also we saw another important policy move, which was the suspending of listing with the credit reference bureaus. And the reason why this is important is because now banks are moving towards what we're calling risk-based pricing. Previously, banks were pricing their loans on a portfolio basis. So if you want a mortgage, it's a flat rate for all mortgage holders. Trade finance, SME finance, it was really at the portfolio level, but now the industry, before COVID, the industry started to move towards the risk-based pricing where the interest rate that a client gets is directly affiliated or tied to the individual business owner or the individual borrower. So by suspending the listing of default data, what this means is it does not provide the environment for interest rates to go up within those sectors that are directly hit by COVID. So those were the two twin policy moves that were very important that we were able to negotiate between Central Bank and the KBA. So I think what we are seeing banks do with this excess liquidity is renegotiate loan contracts with their clients. And the challenge I think the industry is facing right now is that the need is so much. So almost every business and every client is requesting to renegotiate their loan term. So banks are spending some time really looking at fast tracking those industries that have been impacted, like for example, hotels, hospitality industry, for example, where for sure, airline industry, where for sure business has completely been suspended due to the physical distancing situation and the closed borders and such. So there are those industries that were immediately impacted by COVID, and then there are those which are that are on the next level. So banks are working, just kind of doing a quick scan. Banks are giving payment holidays. So I've seen banks suspend loan repayments 3 months. I've seen some say 1 year, like Habib Bank has extended the moratorium for their clients 1 year. I've seen banks like KCB setting up a fund for SMEs, a 30 billion fund in partnership with M-Pesa. Banks like Standard Chartered, NCBA. So many of them are looking at different ways to implement that policy directive that the additional liquidity opened up. So I think what I would encourage the AAK members to do is to proactively engage with their bankers, because the banks are not going to be knocking on your door. If you think about it, banks like Equity Bank have 20 million customers, right? So the customers who are proactive and engaging and really explaining their situation, I think those are the ones that will get a faster result than if you're waiting for banks to contact you. So I know it takes about 3 days to 1 week for the loan to be renegotiated and either moratorium or suspension or whatever the case might be based on the customer's needs. But it starts with that conversation with the bank. And I think what banks are doing is really just focusing on their existing clients right now. So I think what's good is if you engage the bank where you have a relationship and more so where you have a business relationship. So it's interesting, Kenyans, we have very many banking relationships. The average Kenyan has 3 to 5 bank accounts or 3 to 5 bank relationships, right? So I think what this whole environment is teaching us is many different bank relationships, but it's really important to have that one solid business relationship with one financier, because when things like this happen, you want to have a financier that has visibility on your cash flows and really understands your business. So banks that hold your transactional accounts, banks that hold your overdraft facilities, for example, those are the banks where you probably should go to first. To hopefully you're borrowing from them, but go to them first to see how you can renegotiate your contract. If you have an overdraft relationship but not a formal, like lots of history on borrowing with that institution, at least through the overdraft, ideally they should be able to see the change in your cash flows, and based on that, then definitely those loan arrangements will be extended and probably additional capital will be opened up. So really the lesson we have here is this issue about having a relationship-based, as businesses, we should have a relationship-based approach, not only with the banks, but everybody who provides us with finance and equity. So when things like COVID happen, which again, like we said earlier, these situations are going to continue to happen, at least that way we are able to effectively engage based on our track record.
Okay, thank you so much, Nuru. I think you've given us a lot to digest, and I think I'm picking the relationships are very important that you built along the way, and to be proactive as well. I think a question in terms of questions to the moderators, I want to stop there, and I want us to go through some of the questions from the audience. They have been coming in as the session has been ongoing. I want to start with the question from James Getoho. He's one of our fellow members. And maybe Momo, I'll direct this one over to you because you did mention a little bit about the elections coming up. How do we see this COVID crisis playing out with the coming elections in 2022 in terms of business continuity? That's a question from fellow James Getoho.
Okay, thank you very much. My answer is probably that my guess is as good as anyone's guess. You know, the situation with Kenya and the election cycle is a peculiar one. It doesn't follow any logic. It's just driven by political emotion and investor confidence in investing through this period. Now, I sincerely hope that this particular situation will cause the leadership of this country to really rethink the way politics is done, because we can't afford coming out of 2016, 2017, and then coming into a global economic recession and depression that is likely to continue for years to come. We can't afford to have politics interfere with business. And I remember in 2008, 2007, 2008, when we had the elections at that time, the business community rallied and was very bullish at the time to continue investing, and the momentum was actually quite strong. In fact, I think that's probably one of the years where we had one of our most transformational economic growth in the last 20 years. And then the post-election violence happened and everything just crashed overnight. And why am I mentioning this? I'm saying this because, business can work, business can grow despite the election cycle. And, we have to give businesses the space to recover through this period. I certainly hope as an association and as members here, which there should be a very strong lobby coming out to, make sure that we protect and in some cases institutionalize a lot of the very important efforts that are being put towards economic growth in this country. The fight against corruption, the reform in the financial sector, the reform within government that's currently ongoing. We have to make sure that those are strongly protected and institutionalized so that businesses can continue to function through this period. And then, pray to God that our politicians behave themselves.
Thank you very much for that, Mumo. I just want to go over to Jaspal. Jaspal, firstly, thank you. I can see you've answered a number of the questions that have been popping up in the Q&A. I do want to maybe, there's a student who is here with us from KU, third year in architecture, and he had a question in terms of what you feel the hiring criteria will be in the built environment and how it will change after the pandemic. However, at the same time, I think I had a question for you, which I'd like to tie into that one as well, which is whether you feel that what we're teaching right now in our schools of the built environment prepares our graduates to be resilient and to think about the issues we're discussing today, and if not, what you would recommend. So Jaspal, over to you.
Thanks, Mugure. In terms of teaching, I think we recognize there's a big gap, even pre-COVID scenario. You find, you have graduates who come out who have largely had a strong emphasis on design and presentations. So a person can put together pretty good digital format presentation. Now, you find some of the skills that end up lacking is one, generally in the architecture courses, we do not have any business units that prepare, a person to actually run a practice. So we get a skill. The skill is how to practice architecture in terms of design as a key chunk, which is 80-90%. of what you do. When you come to reality, that component is just a much smaller fraction of a practice. There is the administrative side of things, there is the human resource side of things, there is the business side of things. So one of the skills that lacks is how to monetize your skill that you actually gather while undergoing your education. How do you come out? How do you sell yourself? Even when the guys are coming out to, get a job, how do they present themselves? What are they selling? So that's, I think, one of the aspects that needs to be touched on. They need to be made to understand a bit more on office practice and what we think are simple steps, but actually they don't seem to be, because the overemphasis is on design. So the guys come to the office, they feel, oh, if I do some design work, my salary is catered for. And they have to understand that this is just a cog in the whole system, and it's just one of the smaller elements. There are many other factors that come into practice. Another aspect of teaching that I think could enhance the way we get the graduates coming out is communication skill. Being able to communicate. Unfortunately now with the smartphones and your WhatsApps and your social media, you find, we get applications today where a guy will write to you, hey, hi, I'm looking for a job. Let me know when I can come and see you. Or they'll even use the acronyms and, not really write to you a proper letter. So you find that has created a gap, which translates into practice at a more serious level, because now at an individual level, you're not able to communicate with your team effectively. And in turn, they are not able to also communicate with your client base, because at the end of the day, you find you have them interacting with your clients in terms of emails or at sites, etc. And the communication gap becomes very evident at that point. So we really need the communication skills to be properly polished. Another aspect that is very, very key is just basic time management, where a person needs to learn how to manage their time. Once they're able to manage their time, it's key for everything. You'll find attendance. When you talk to some of the students, they tell you, lectures would start at 8:30, I'd show up at 9, and there was no issue. I just carry on, half the classes come. So that aspect ends up portraying itself when they come to practice. Time, deadlines, timelines are something that, sort of needs to be integrated into the whole training of the students. I think there needs to be obviously a holistic emphasis on the whole practice of architecture. I think it would be good if placement was really value oriented. When people go for placement, the assessment and the expectations from both sides needs to be clarified, because sometimes we take up students on placement, but we are not sure what exactly is required of them, or what we can ask them to do, or what their skill set is at the particular time when they come for placements. I also think it's very important that, design is a key element in architecture, but there also needs to be a lot of exposure to the reality of building, the technical side. A graduate comes out and, he doesn't know what hardcore looks like. So we take things for granted, and you find so there's a gap there between technology and design and practice and site management skills. And another key component that would be helpful is people management skills, because you find they come out and you're getting into an organization, you're dealing with X number of other people. It's for there to be a symbiotic relationship and for the system to work, everyone needs to be able to work in harmony. So there's a whole people management skill thing. Now it gets very worrying when you see people on the phone all the time. They're not able to communicate verbally, which means it has affected their skills in learning. You can imagine what it will do to people communicating verbally in a meeting. When we run our private meetings, it's verbal. You look at someone, even if you do it over a media like this, it's very different if it was audio, and it's very different when you can see someone, because you want to see the facial gestures and understand how, you know, you use body language as part of, you know, it's integral to your communication. So those are some of the aspects that I think, you know, they might not be design related, but I think the values, the orientation toward values is a very key important aspect, because it affects you then in your whole life as well. So I think that's a large component of education that needs to be included, you know, in a specialized sort of profession like architecture.
There's also a question from Kenneth Amunsimire. He's actually logged in from Uganda Society of Architects. His question is, which business forms will handle the COVID crisis more resiliently? What's the future for sole proprietorships and partnerships? I think I'll direct this question to Cecilia. And then maybe just to, along that question, Nuru, maybe it would be nice to hear about what businesses, you talked a little bit about the businesses that are suffering right now under COVID-19. Which ones do you see that are thriving as well? So Cecilia, maybe first on the form of business, and then Nuru.
Right. I think just to follow the discussions that we've had across the whole webinar, I think we have stated, and I think all the panelists have brought it to fore, that the business that will actually survive any crisis the best is the one that is able to adapt and adapt quickly. It's the one that is able to apply all the tools that they've done of their planning to be able to handle such disruptions and apply them effectively, while looking at, we have a situation now and then we need to adapt very quickly. Now, the reason I'm saying that is just because you're one person or you're 10 people or because you're 40 people does not necessarily mean that you may have more or less capacity to adapt to the crisis. And I'll tell you why. Because resilience is business-based, yeah? So, and you have to have your measures worked in quite quickly based on your strengths and your weaknesses, yeah? So your capacity to work on it depends on a lot, very many factors beyond the fact or beyond how the business is structured. And one of those is, what are your strengths? Whichever way you're structured, what are those strengths that you actually have? Is it your people and their technical capacity? And is that something you can ride on going forward? It becomes that item that you can very actively market as you get out of this to be able to pick up more than anyone else. Then two is the capacity to learn and develop. Yeah, how much of that of yourself do you apply to be able to develop even in a crisis to become better and get better quickly, yeah? And then of course there's the other issues that we had discussed regarding the planning aspects, which is, have you been looking at effects of the movements in the economy? Yeah. So it's not an issue of I'm looking at I'm a sole proprietor, so I'm not affected by issues to do with the global economy. I'm not affected by regional issues. I'm not affected by the national economy. So how well have you looked at those items of the economy to be able to craft your business, to be able to respond to that? So it's that level of planning as a business and as a structure of how you operate that would help you in a case like this.
Thank you, Cecilia. I think over to you, Nuru.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the businesses that will do well in this environment or are doing well in this environment, it includes obviously the private healthcare, manufacturing, but not all of manufacturing. I think definitely those manufacturers that are able to, if their machines allow it, they're able to shift production from what they had before to COVID-aligned production. Definitely, we know that telecom companies and IT-related, ICT-related companies are going to do very well now and forever. I think definitely also consulting. Consulting is a space that probably we don't talk about enough. But again, that's where your sector, the Architectural Association, you are well positioned to really quickly shift your models to this whole new space of consulting, because everybody's going to be re-engineering whichever sector it is. It's all manufacturing, hardcore infrastructure. Everybody's going to be shifting their approach and really looking at how to redesign in this new era. So definitely consulting is going to do well. I think I talked about earlier the industries that I think were directly hit, including hospitality. I think food service industry is also a mixed bag, right? So I think a lot of the companies that had already skewed themselves to this whole relationship-based approach and data-based approach to their business model, I think they're doing very well. So these are the ones who actually know who their customers are, so they can reach out to them on phone, hit them up on WhatsApp. They already have a database, so they know what people like, so they're able to customize the product and deliver it digitally. I think there are those other food service providers. I guess some of us who are on this phone, on this line, probably might even own a cafe that you had to close because customers are not walking in. You don't have the footfall. But I think those small cafes and the kiosks are really going to be affected. However, the silver lining there is, I think, hopefully now they're relooking their business models. Yeah, I think everybody is probably relooking at this whole issue about data and how do I make sure I know who my customers are, I know where they live, I know what they like, I know how much, what their lifetime value is for my business. I can calculate how much they are worth to me, and therefore I know how much to invest in that customer versus another customer. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag across the industrial sectors. Which is why I know the government is working to really understand which are those industries that are most adversely affected and how can they be supported. I know there is the COVID fund that's been set up by His Excellency that's looking to raise money. And of course, indeed, a lot of the funding is going to direct intervention. But I know there are conversations around, okay, what about supporting the SMEs that are affected? So it's not just about the PPE and the ventilators and setting up quarantine facilities and testing capability, but it's also about on the economic side, how can we support that? So yeah, that's kind of what I would say.
Thank you so much for that, Nuru. We had hoped to end our session at 4:30 just for the panelists and the audience, but I want to give about another 10 minutes just to go through some of the other questions, and we can end at 4:40, 4:45 if that's in order, just so we can at least try and get through the questions. I also want to just say thank you to Gregory, the student from KU who's with us, because I do know it's not many students that we get participating in this webinar, so thank you so much for being here. I think that shows of initiative in terms of what's happening in the industry. I want to take a question from Manmeet. Manmeet Jabal has a question saying, could any of the panelists discuss possible opportunities in design and architecture going forward? There may be greater emphasis towards health, safety, efficiency in construction, relying more on IT to find solutions, working and marketing remotely, lesser travel when possible, and so on. I'll throw this question over to Momo. Momo, would you like to give us some input on that?
Sure. I think definitely on the immediate and medium-term horizon, one of the things that's come out very clearly is our inadequate healthcare infrastructure and support. So I think there's huge opportunities in that. There's definitely huge opportunities in us looking at replanning or sorting out the messes in our towns and our cities. The one thing that this whole pandemic has brought to light is how we live and possibly the impact of that in terms of disease spread and management. So I think as a profession, there's an opportunity in terms of that sector. Manufacturing, I know that you know, one of the big wake-up calls coming out of this whole pandemic is I think we've all realized the impact of reliance on China for you know, supply of goods to this country, you know, for different businesses. So, you know, when China shut down, you know, businesses have just been impacted in a way that you can't imagine. So I would like to imagine that manufacturing, value addition sectors should be an interesting area to look at, because what this is calling us to do is to learn to be self-sufficient as a country first before we reach out. And then the other area that I think could be interesting to look at is the whole concept of biomedical engineering and research. You know, this pandemic is probably the first of many of its severity that we are going to go through, and a lot of that is because of the fact that, you know, we live in an interconnected global world. So you've seen how fast this disease has spread across the globe. It's literally touched everywhere in the globe in a relatively short period of time. So, you know, there's always going to be this challenge, and there's always going to be this risk on pandemics and biomedical engineering. So I think that's an area that you know, we have an opportunity as an economy in East Africa to be thinking about doing in terms of a project opportunity area. I don't know if that answers that question.
Yes, I think that's you've given us a lot to think about with that response, Mumo. And again, you know, I think our responses will never be exhaustive because there's so much to think about and to consider. And I hope that this conversation will continue. I want to take another question from Olivia Otieno, and it kind of ties into a comment. We do have the chair of NCA here with us, US David Gaido. He's part of the audience. Olivia asked, as consultants in the built environment, please advise what's the best reaction to this COVID-19 on running projects, to continue or to suspend. And I noted a comment from the NCA chair to follow the NCA guidelines, but I do want to maybe just put it over to Jaspal. In terms of running projects, what would be the recommendation, continue or to suspend?
Thank you for the opportunity to answer this question. In my opinion, it is very important to follow the government directives, first of all. So the government has not requested that projects be suspended or everything gets into a lockdown. They have allowed working hours up to, you know, there's the curfew, which we need to respect. In which case, I think it is fair for you to continue your projects wherever it is possible. Please maintain safety, emphasize to your teams, get the safety standards outlined very clearly. When you go to your sites, ensure it's happening. This is not something to joke around with. It is something which needs to be implemented. Ensure that people are wearing masks, ensure the health and safety, normal NCA building guidelines are being followed. Ensure people are sanitizing, ensure they are washing their hands, ensure you have a way of making it easy for your staff to access their meals, like on the sites, so that you minimize them consuming things from kiosks, etc., outside where they could be more exposed. But it is extremely important we understand that we are responsible for the livelihood of thousands, if not millions of people. Every project that you stop means livelihood of easily 100 to 200 families who are surviving on a daily wage. You know, the moment you stop it, you're sending these people home. Most construction companies will not sustain those people. We will have a bigger problem. So it is my strong suggestion that people try to retain, but safety is key.
Absolutely.
You know, it's, you know, the numbers that we are talking about of people who could end up being hungry is just phenomenal. And we would obviously like to minimize the amount of damage that the pandemic will cause. Number two, we really don't know how long this situation is going to last. So it's not something we can really, you know, project and say, it's okay, you'll go home for 10 days and then we'll get you back. So as long as the government is allowing people to work, as long as the means are there to ensure there is safety and we are following the guidelines, we need to try as much as possible to ensure that our projects carry on. Remember, this is the lifeline for many of us. The moment this gets stopped, we go back to square one, and it can take us a lot longer to come back to probably where we are or we were before the pandemic. So we also need to focus on the positive. It is not all negative. There's a lot of stuff I think we are going to learn about ourselves, about the industry, about how to work, about how to do things, and it would be good for us to take you know, precedence and you know, show, you know, take the lead and let other professionals also understand that it is not all doom and gloom. You know, we are dealing with a big community. So let's look at the positive side of it. Let's see how to make it work. As architects, at the end of the day, we are problem solvers. That is what our key job description is. And we must be able to lead and let people know that, you know, we can look for other ways to make the same stuff happen. It is very, very important, I re-emphasize, the livelihood of thousands of people depends on us. So we must attempt to keep them on board so that they can earn a living and not be locked down. Just to put it in perspective, imagine sending a person home who is going to spend, you know, 2 weeks or a month in a room with his family. You know, we've really got to be open-minded. You're sending this guy, we are going to end up having, you know, mental health issues. We're going to get a lot of other implications that are, you know, going to come out of a situation like that. So it is very important we think of the big picture and the positive side of it. You know, let us also talk about the positive. It has made us understand our families better, made us spend time with our pets. The cat and dog story that you're giving, we can do a small research on it to see if the cat is a better hunter than the dogs, you know, etc. So we need to turn this thing around and not just see it as something to pull us down, but something that can make us engage. You know, you might find your relationship with your staff is better because you're now forced to engage with them on a daily basis. They may have been resistive to some of the processes in place, but they also realize that without those, they cannot really manage. So, you know, there is, I think, a positive side to this whole situation. Same thing happens to these webinars. Maybe you will stop doing the CPDs that we go to Safari Park and, you know, pay whatever we pay. I won't mention that. And then adopt a system like this where you can do, you know, 20 webinars in a year. And, you know, I'm sure with time, people will realize that it saves you the travel time and cost and everything else. And people have the comfort of participating from wherever they are. So I think let's look at it a lot more positively than just looking at it from a doom and gloom perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaspal. I think that's really the attitude that's needed by all of us, is to be as positive as we can. I want to just highlight one question from Shamla, which is more of a challenge to AAK. Most of the mitigation suggestions are upon the business person to carry out. As mentioned, businesses in the built environment sector were already struggling. What can we do going forward to engage with policy and regulation makers, government, to put measures in place to spur local business and reduce the amount of work that has been exported. I'll answer it a little bit, but I'll also maybe go to Nuru in terms of policy and regulation that government might have put in place to spur local business. Maybe just good to mention to the participants that AAK is a member of the CAPSA Land Sector and Development Board. And through that, we have also been giving our input as a BMO to proposals that we feel that government can implement to support the construction industry. And that's across the board. Even before the tax incentives were introduced, we had already written to CAPSA and the government to go ahead and look at as tax as one of the areas that they could perhaps provide assistance to small businesses in. On terms of local content, that's also been one of our major advocacy points as an association, that consultancy work and construction work must have local input. As late as this morning, I was in a session to do with local content, and that has remained one of the most important things as an association that we're advocating on. So just to reassure you, Shamla, that we are having these conversations as to strategies that can stimulate the construction industry right now and post-COVID. And then I'll hand over to Nuru in case you'd like to add one or two comments on that.
Sorry, my phone almost fell. Okay, yeah. So probably what I would add, just listening to Jaspal, is this point around how many jobs your members are able to create, both formal and in the informal sector. I think it's an important indicator from a policy perspective. So not just only in terms of how you're helping on the fiscal side, but also directly from your businesses, but also how you're able to create employment. And I was just kind of thinking about his comment that it's true, you really have to be able to now start tracking and really understanding how many jobs you're creating on your sites. And I know there's that, it's a double-edged sword, because you also don't want now KRA swooping in to your sites to start trying to garnish wages. But I think we are all now appreciating why we need data. So for example, I saw a comment on the chat session about the cynical views around the COVID fund. The reason why the COVID fund will not really, or will be limited in terms of its ability to help Mwananchi on the ground, is because we don't know where they are. We don't know how many they are. So how do you disperse a social security or a safety net program when you don't have data, you don't have content, you don't know how many people you're planning for, you don't know where they are. So I think we as a society, we need to move, and it's a partnership, right? So government needs to play its role in making sure when they collect our taxes, there is no misappropriation and all these other things, right? So government has a role to play, but private sector and individuals, we also have a role to play to be able to be seen. So therefore, government programs can benefit us and benefit those who need it most. So I think from an AAK perspective, it's an opportunity for you to really engage at the policy level and also the donors. If you're able to demonstrate how many jobs are going to be lost because of COVID, I'm sure you can get some funding coming through to AAK. If you think about how CAM, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, they were very effective in fundraising and raising capital, which is being deployed through banks. So they were able to engage with DFIs and sovereign wealth funds and donors to set up the SUNREF program. I think some of you might be aware of the SUNREF program. So they brought in concessionary loans, which were lent to the banks, for the banks to lend to manufacturers. So I think that's another opportunity you might want to look at, anchored on the social impact of your sector. Because everybody, all the donors, all the governments, all the sovereigns are now, high net worth individuals are all now looking at COVID. So if you're able to advocate for your sector through that entry point, I think that might be something you can look at.
Right, great. Thank you so much for that. So we want to wind up. You know, there's a lot we could discuss, and really it can't end. So I just want to take a parting shot, just, you know, a 30-second parting shot from each of the panelists as we wind up. So we'll start off with Cecilia. Cecilia, your parting shot.
Thank you, Gure. I think first I'd like to thank AAK for setting up such webinars. It's something that we're actually now really starting to appreciate, and we all get to collectively get to learn a lot by sharing across the board. But I think my parting shots related to this topic is the fact that this situation, beyond anything else, disrupts the status quo. If we all collectively look at how Kenya has always operated, and in fact, indeed the region and maybe even Africa, how it's always operated, we've been very big consumers of the West and more lately China. So I'd just like to say, I'm hoping this is one of those issues that has get to be very seriously disrupted so we can spur our own development. A market will only provide that which the people want to consume. So even at a personal level, if you want to consume the West, that's what the market will provide. So if we cannot change our focus and we do so collectively, I believe there's hope in this economy to get even better as we get out of this situation.
Hey, thank you so much, Cecilia, and for being part of this panel. We really appreciate you. Jaspal, your parting shot.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for allowing us to participate in this interesting discussion. We are no experts, but we would share whatever knowledge we have. I think for me, I would like to emphasize on people remaining positive during this period. Please don't dwell on the negative. The more you dwell on it, the more it affects you. Be positive, look at the other side of the coin. There's too much of, negative messaging on social media, etc. Look at the positive, see what you can learn from it to improve yourself. Use the time that you have to learn new skills, to learn, to find out new possibilities. Volunteer your time. Volunteer into guys who are putting together, the hospitals, the extensions to hospitals, the tented hospitals or food relief. Volunteer, be positive, talk to your people, talk to your staff, communicate as much as you can, because everyone needs to feel wanted. Everyone needs to feel cared for. So it is extremely important we maintain a positive attitude. The other thing that would be good to venture into is to understand that it's very critical as a country, as a whole, we look towards self-sustenance. The gaps of whatever we import and why we import, if we can look at them and look at a way of coming back to, redo some of the things that we had heavily relied on importation for, would be something that is worth looking into, so that we actually open up new channels. If this was to end and we went back and set up again our import and our reliance on foreign people and foreign countries, I think we will have lost some opportunities. Because as Momo said, this thing could happen again. It could be one of many. I would like to be positive, of course, and say it won't happen again. And lastly, I would like everyone to bear in mind that at the end of the day, we are all one. We are all one. Everything you do, you have a moral, humanitarian responsibility to see everyone else as, you have a responsibility to look after them, right? You be your brother's keeper. So when people are in need, you need to offer wherever you can, be available, try to make a difference. This is the opportunity you have for people to come together. There are people you've never met. There are people you've never related with. You have an opportunity to relate with them in a different context, in a different situation. So if we can actually understand that we are all one and support one another, I think we will come out stronger after the event happens, if at all it has an end date or not. But keep building on it so that becomes a new part of us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Jaspal. Nuru, over to you. A parting.
Yeah, so just to appreciate everybody's on the line. I saw at some point we're up to 50 participants. So just thanking everyone for taking the time to join us and engage in this conversation. So for me, I think it's just two things. One, I think is just, again, the opportunity within this. I think when when countries are emerging from COVID, like we're seeing in Asia, for example, I think we are seeing that the governments have and industry have taken this opportunity to almost restructure and reprogram society and the economy into what they want for the future. So I think we've all talked about the fourth industrial revolution and how technology is going to shape and how things are going to be different. I think we need to take this time to quickly get on board the future that we want, because once we emerge from this COVID cloud, it'll be here. Right, so we need to be the architects and the engineers of what is that future we want. So, for example, from a sustainability perspective, I think a lot of us who are sustainability champions grapple with the fact that our urban design is not sustainable. We don't even have proper waste management systems. The transport sector is a huge emitter of carbon, but this is also an opportunity to engage. So once the footfall returns to the supermarkets, once the cars return to the roads and the lorries and the trucks and all that, what is it that we want to see and how can we design that now? So I think I would just leave that thought. There are lots of sustainable and sustainability, green economy, sustainable finance trainings that are available online. I've seen Harvard, for example, has rolled out some free training. I think many universities are rolling out free training. So let's take that opportunity, like Jaspal said, to train, but let's train with the view of what's the future once we emerge from COVID. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Nuru, and thank you for being part of this panel of architects. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. Momo, your parting shot, please.
I think from my end, I'd like to thank all those who've participated in this webinar, my colleagues here. I think the insights that you've all shared have been very interesting, very educative, even for myself as one of the participants here. So I'd just like to acknowledge and thank all of you guys for your participation, and Mugure for you and AAK organizing this. I think for me, the message that I'd like to leave with, because I think all the other stuff has been covered, is just to reinforce what Jaspal was saying earlier about work ethic. I was tempted to jump in when he was talking about work ethic and attitude. I think that's going to be a very important component for business sustainability. And if we have the right work ethic, work attitude, then we will find ways of pulling through difficulties. And if you look at the economies in the world that have grown out of crisis, they have done so because of the dedication and the commitment and the professionalism and integrity of the people that are responsible for making decisions and implementing them, including ourselves. So I think for me, that's the challenge to all of us, that this is time to really draw back onto our DNA and make sure that we are practicing the right work ethic. We are training this in schools, students coming out of university, coming out to the right attitude, and we apply the right work ethic in what we do, and look ahead positively. We must not be focused only on what's in our pockets. We have to think about the impact that we give to our country, our environment, our people. We are architecture is very much a social enterprise. We're responsible for defining space, encouraging investment, motivating good quality life through the way we design, plan, and do things. So thank you guys. That's been most interesting. And thank you very much to those who've signed in to listen. Asante.
So much. Thank you so much for that, Mumo. We appreciate it. I just want in closing to mention that AAK does have a COVID-19 rapid response team that's supporting the Kenya Healthcare Federation, KHF, and through them to the ministry as well as to private healthcare institutions. And we are supporting them through interventions, whether it's in existing facilities, developing new isolation centers, field responses, whether it's hospitals, tents, or container facilities. So we have 5 working groups as an association that are responding to COVID-19, and we want to encourage all the members who are in this webinar, if you're interested in joining that response as a way of making an impact during this crisis, please do get in touch with the association. We also had a few questions on contract issues, and Jaspal, I saw you trying to responding to those, which I think was a very good response. I do want to mention that we have weekly webinars, and May 13 will be on the JBC contract, and we'll be discussing that in detail and the challenges people are witnessing on JBC contract. Next week will be a session run by Town Planners Chapter. It will be on informal settlements and how we can respond for them to be more adaptive and resilient in the time of COVID-19 or in the future similar pandemics. We have a very interesting set of speakers. We have Jack Macau from Shack Dwellers International, Jane Weru, so the conversation will be quite engaging on that topic. On May 6th, which was why I was encouraged to see a student, will be a session for students. We'll have the student association leaders as the panelists of all the universities that focus on the built environment in Kenya. But we will also have a student representative from the association also of Makerere. So we are trying to be as engaging and as relevant as possible, and to try and also address all our member issues across the board, including our students who do have certain concerns. So I want to just leave it there and hand over to Olivia, and just to say thank you again to the panelists. We really appreciate you for being here with us today, and thank you again to the attendees as well. So Olivia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mugure, for the session, well moderated. And I want to thank all the panelists, Cecilia, Jaspal, Nuru, Mumo, and Danielle in absentia. Thank you for your good insights. And I want to thank all the attendees for finding time to join us this evening. And I believe we've learned 1 or 2 things that are going to help us to become better in our businesses, our professions, and in all the projects that we are currently handling. So let's keep checking the webinars, the upcoming ones, as Mugure has mentioned. Also, thank you, the Secretariat. We have our members who are, our Secretariat, who are helping us to manage and plan for all. Until the next time, thank you all. Have a good evening, and God bless you. Thank you. I think you can leave at your own pleasure and leisure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.